Aloha, I am June Jones of the Houston Roughnecks, and this is the XFL Show.
More burger! For the love of football! 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 Let's go!
If you smell what the XFL is cooking.
Welcome, football fans. This is For the Love of Football, and this is the XFL Show. I'm Alan.
And I'm Bryant.
The forbidden door has been opened, and we still don't know exactly what is behind the damn thing. But we do know that the XFL has new owners with a resume that some would say are 5, 6, maybe even 7-star resumes. Is that what a league like the CFL needs to fix a broken business model? Is that what the world needs, Bryant, for football to expand globally? This is episode 167. We're all business today.
Just business.
No
rules,
rules,
just business. And that's
all
how I'm going to act. Very
business.
professional. I think I should go get a tie. Maybe. I don't have a sport coat, though. So maybe it's just going to be a tie on top of my Wildcats t-shirt here. I don't know. It is just business. We'll get into what Randy Ambrosie said about the league's current discussions with the XFL.
Big update week for Randy. The update tour 2021 for Randy Ambrosie, the commissioner of the CFL. Update tour 2021, the CFL, with some big announcements that we anticipated regarding their 2021 season. We're talking CFL, even though this is not the CFL show, but alignment with the XFL. We have to pay attention to it. What's going on with the CFL? Well, we got a lot of updates to the beginning of their season this week. Non-updates to the XFL negotiations with the CFL. We're going to get into all of it on this week's show. 724-565-4XFL is the XFL fan line for you to call. Hit us up. The number's right down there below us. And you could get on the show, or you could ask a question, whatever you want. Text us your question, your comment, and we'll get into it when we dink and dunk around at the beginning of the show, because that's what we do every week, Bryant.
It is what we do every single week. Alan, did you mention that we have, Dave Naylor on the show today too, by the way?
We have Dave Naylor again.
Okay.
Yes, I was getting to that.
Sure.
That was going to be the big part here, the big chunk of the show. Conversation that you get going with Dave Naylor of TSN, Football Insider, Bryant, and you're like, okay, we'll have him for 15 minutes. He's a busy guy. We go for 20. Okay, we'll have him for another couple minutes. We end up like a 30, 40-minute conversation, hearing great stories, hearing great insight, and it's, I would say, maybe even better than our first conversation with him about a month ago.
Yeah, no, Dave Naylor seems, I don't think I've talked to Vince or you as long as I've talked to Dave Naylor in the last month or so. So it is a great conversation. Some good insight from the TSN CFL Insider, Dave Naylor.
So he's coming on the show later on. Dave Naylor, TSN. We had him on a month ago when the CFL XFL news kind of broke, and now we have him back to get an update on where things stand, get a reaction and more insight into the announcements made by the CFL this week with regards to their 2021 season. Very, very, very good conversation. We're going to play that for you later on during this week's Hot Read. We'll get into some very, very detailed notes from the Randy Ambrosie update tour in the cover 2 this week. We are brought to you, though, by Pretty Easy Podcast. You could, of course, go check out our great sponsor at prettyeasypodcast.com. We thank them, and we thank you for going to prettyeasypodcast.com to start your own podcast today, because everybody should be able to have a voice and have fun podcasting like we do, Bryant, although they don't get cool Mortal Kombat graphics in their background like we do. Although all you have to do is say, hey, Pretty Easy Podcast, hook me up, and they give you the toasty guy behind you, because that's what I got today, because Mortal Kombat comes out this week, in case you didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know it came out this week. I'm only playing actually old school SNES games now. So,
well, you could play Mortal Kombat on SNES, but there's no blood because Nintendo.
Oh, that's Nintendo. It's fine. It's not real.
It's not. but Pretty Easy Podcast is. And they have a catchphrase real quick. What is that?
They make podcasting pretty easy.
Get over here. Get the camera back on me. And let's talk about what we're going to be doing today. Some tweets, some reactions. Oh my goodness. A YouTube comment that just totally did not age well, Bryant. We'll get into it real quick at XFL Show. If you want to hit us up on social media, on Twitter and Instagram, or wherever you socialize and get down, let your love for football lead the way at XFL Show. And before we even kick the show off today, I also want to acknowledge we lost a member of the XFL family this past week. Very tragic. Former USC offensive lineman and DC defender Chris Brown passed away, Bryant. Horrible, young, 24 years old, tragic. Never want to see something like this, but we do want to acknowledge it because a member of the XFL family is family to us. So rest in peace to Chris Brown and all of our love and support to his friends and family.
Absolutely, yes.
So we pay tribute to a fallen XFL brother as we move on with this show. We're going to dink and dunk first and foremost around XFL social media. And right before we went on the chair here for recording, because we're not on the air, because podcasting's different from radio. I sometimes forget, Bryant, but former Renegades defensive coordinator Chris Woods acknowledging that the LFA in Mexico, the Liga Futbol Americano, I believe, one of our favorite football leagues to watch after we close up shop on a recording evening. I keeping an ey out, I guess, is the rumor for the XFL Cfl negotiations. I think their commissioner might have had some comments, Brian, about it. But that hit social media a bit. And defensive coordinator Chris Woods from the Renegades tweets out right before we started today, which is great. Good timing. With the inevitable merger of the CFL and XFL, plus the Liga del Futbol Americano Profesional into the North American Football League, the hashtag NAFL, I'm throwing my hat in the ring to coach either Cancun, Cabo, or Puerto Vallarta teams. Let's make it so at The Rock, with emojis such as the sun and the waves, and looks like a Mai Tai.
Yeah.
And a palm tree and a sunglasses with shades. Go, if you can dream it, Chris Woods, it can be real. We wish him luck in becoming.
If you put your mind to it, you can accomplish anything.
Cougars. Yes.
The Cancun, yes. Los Culebras de Cancun is what we said it would be. Football in the beach. You know, this kind of reminded me. It just hit me. Do you remember back in 2018, when we were discussing what cities would be great cities for the XFL to actually be in? And you and Vincent, I think it was Jake, I don't think I was part of this conversation, said it would be great to have a tourist city where like the attraction is having the tourists come to the game. I guess one of those would be one of the markets for that. What are you doing in Cancun? I came and saw a football game, XFL game. Isn't it like always cheap to get down there? I guess it depends on where you're flying from, but totally, yeah. The colder it is here, the harder it is to get down there.
Why do we instantly go to Cancun? The team in Mexico is going to play in Mexico City or TJ, right? Chris Woods is mistaken here. I think he's dreaming, which I respect, but I love how badly he wants to just be coaching again in the XFL or whatever's next, because he has some fun tweets. I went down his timeline too. The former defensive coordinator for the Renegades.
I think we have a drop from him too, if I'm not mistaken.
We do. I might have to research it here while you talk in a little bit.
Was it defensive coordinator? No, was it offensive coordinator? Yeah, the Hal Mummy got a lot of XFL coaches in the news this week. Hal Mummy's in the TSL, and so is was it Kevin Gilbride? Kevin Gilbride got another job.
Kevin Gilbride's in it, which is kind of a shock to me. The two are hey, age is just a number, because older coaches still have a ton to give, still want to, give their knowledge and do work. And I respect it and love it. So I'm excited now for the spring league, which, like we said last week, that TV deal, you're going to be able to see all those games easily. And I mean, Vince, like our friend, he'll just watch it just for Hal Mummy. Some people will do that.
Play fast, do it again.
I want to see some Hal Mummy offense.
Play fast, do it again.
Let's do it. So coaches in the news and getting active on social media. Love to see that. And as we finish up dinking and dunking around here, Bryant, YouTube comments generally for us aren't too heinous. This one's not heinous. It just didn't age well. And, you know, I saw where they were coming from, but then, you know, with the announcement from Randy Ambrosie this week of the postponement of basically the CFL calendar, the moving it back a little bit, none of this made sense from Joe on YouTube, who questioned your KROQ, K-Rock analogy last week, which I appreciated.
Thank you.
I believe you said it's like something about like playing different music and that you're offending people with some music, but then really getting people into it with the other, and you can't please
You're always
everybody,
pissing
basically.
somebody off, right? You're always play Weezer and you play Modest Yao. You're a pleasing half and you're pissing off the other half.
Are you trying to say Matis Yahoo?
Was Modest Yao when I grew up? Is it Modest Yahoo now? I thought it was the other way around. I think it's Modest Yao now. Anyway,
either way, you're a fan of K-Rock, and so am I, and we like that analogy. I thought it made sense, but Joe didn't. And Joe said the merger, if it happens, will absorb the XFL. Too much history in the CFL for it to happen in reverse. Grey Cup will not move out of Thanksgiving weekend. All of that other stuff may be, but the Grey Cup moving out of Thanksgiving weekend, at least this year, Joe, is happening because that got moved to December 12th.
So not always going to be. Also, mind you, last year, not played on Thanksgiving either. Also, which Thanksgiving is it?
Yeah, I don't know.
My Thanksgiving, is it the Canadian Thanksgiving?
Canadian Thanksgiving too much, but I know that they do some different things, different dates or whatever. But I definitely am pretty sure it's not in December. Is that correct, Bryant?
That is, I believe. Yeah. They have Boxing Day, which I don't think is Thanksgiving. It's the only other thing I know that they have down there.
That's why I love Canada. They a nation that dedicates a holiday to pugilism. The sweet science is what I'm all about. That's Boxing Day, right?
I don't know. I read this a little because the way it was written out, it says, if it happens, we'll absorb the XFL. Too much history in the CFL for it happen in reverse. I felt like he was just kind of like in a play.
It was very eloquent. And I mean, really honestly too, though, if you're absorbing the XFL, what are you absorbing? There are no teams. There's nothing except ownership right now. So
yeah. So,
but the Grey Cup will not move out anywhere. I'm still in favor of keeping the Grey Cup as the championship, no matter what happens.
Overall, no matter what happens. Yeah, I think so too. It's either that trophy or the piece of tin foil that's sitting inside of McKay's living room right now that I got to actually touch before the season last year. But that's just sitting in like a living room. I think the corners are like bent in, kind of like an old picture where the corners just start bending in slowly. That's what it looked like.
So you got to see what the championship would have been?
No, the 2001 trophy is what I'm saying.
The 2001 trophy. Okay, yeah, the old one. I was going to say, no, this is news, breaking news. Bryant saw what the
Can you imagine?
the fictitious 2020 trophy was going to look like. That would have been some good news to drop here. Unfortunately, we'll just have to wait for the Dave Naylor interview when we run that for some insight and news there. But we appreciate Joe commenting and listening and watching the show on YouTube. And we'll see what happens moving forward with Thanksgiving football whenever the CFL and XFL align in whatever way they align. But we appreciate you at XFL Show on social media if you want to get involved on that dink and dunk segment, or if you want to comment on YouTube too. We go down that hole a little bit until it gets too dark and scary, and then we got to go back up and go, the YouTube comments! But generally, well behaved. Good behavior with a U, especially from the Canadians that have been watching the show lately. If you're ready, Brian, I'm ready, though. We got to go and cover this Randy Ambrosie Update Tour 2021 before we toss it to Dave Naylor.
I'm all for some updates, man. Let's get this covered.
The CFL has postponed their 2021 season officially. We anticipated this. Reports came out last week that we would hear this week. We know this. And now it's officially targeted, not guaranteed to kick off, targeted for August 5th. That gives the CFL, according to Randy Ambrosie and everybody reporting on this week, about mid-June is basically now where they have to have their concrete plans. Okay, August 5th is the date. Okay, this is what's happening. And that's basically the timeline. They're extending the runway, Bryant. Mid-June is where they'll make the decisions. August is where they hope to kick off. Of course, they're waiting on the Canadian government. Can they have fans in all their cities? Not just some, which is the case right now. And is the pandemic and the virus getting, squelched with as more vaccines become available in Canada? Those are the things they're waiting for. So with now a little over a month or a couple months-ish, they're going to wait and see that and then hopefully be able to kick off 2 months later in August. Ambrosi also said this week, Bryant, that they have backup plans, and those backup plans have backup plans, and those backup plans are backed up as well. So they have contingencies in place. So, for instance, say they've even thrown it out there, they can't play in front of... I also, on the update tour, Randy Ambrosie did say how important it is to have fans in the stands. Like, they don't make any bones about it. They don't try to beat around that bush. We are a league that is solely, super dependent on fans being in attendance, which is not the case for most other sports leagues these days. But he said, basically, if that isn't the case, if, government restrictions make it so teams in the East can't have fans, there might be a scenario where the CFL says, okay, we're going to play basically with all the teams playing in the west side of the country. East Coast teams will have home games on the west. So you could see the Argos maybe calling Vancouver home or wherever. So that might happen. That is just the backup scenario that was thrown out there. But just know that they have backup plans. It's just they are really dead set on playing no matter what, ideally with everyone playing in their normal home. And, of course, this is a 14-game season now, Bryant, with the Grey Cup coming December 12th in Hamilton, Ontario. So the CFL, a future XFL partner, that's why we're covering it, is really making some strategic plans to make sure that they kick off this season in 2021. And we have Dave Naylor on later on, Bryant. We did ask him, how damn important is it for the CFL to actually play this year? Are they done ski? Is the CFL no more if they can't kick off this year? That's something we'll get in with Dave Naylor. But what are your thoughts first on the CFL postponing their season, pushing it back to August?
Well, first, I don't know if you remember the movie The Big Hit, Marky Mark and
Lou Diamond
Phillips. Yeah. There's a scene in there where they're trying to trace a call, and the guy's like, "You have Busta? Well, I have Busta, and you have Busta. That's all I think about with these. I have a backup, and then I have a backup, and then I have a backup. It's good that they have these plans. I'm happy, like I've said in the show, and maybe I'll take it back slightly when it comes to I think that they are committing to saying that they are committed to playing. I appreciate them coming out with actual dates instead of saying, hey, we're going to delay and we'll look at it here in a little bit and see what happens.
They had to. They had to. They strung people along, and living in this world of we don't know. It's good to have someone go out there and say, hey, at least this is what we're aiming at. This is what we're thinking. Not 100%. That's just at least somewhat comforting in these uncertain times, because really all people this week could really know for sure is, okay, Mortal Kombat's coming out on Friday, so I'm going to watch that, and everything else in life I don't know in terms of the CFL and getting to go see, I don't know, one of my teams if I'm living in Eastern Canada, because I'm totally locked down, can't even see the Blue Jays. I mean, can't do anything right now.
Well, the Blue Jays are playing in Tampa Bay right now. Oh, no, exactly. I'm sorry, in Orlando. No. Orlando?
They're
somewhere in Florida.
They're in Florida.
They're somewhere south. Yeah, Florida somewhere. I think what Randy Ambrosie is doing is obviously saying, hey, we're trying to make this happen. We are. And I get it, and I appreciate it, like I was saying. But when we talk to Dave Naylor later, when we ask him, is it that important? I mean, ask yourselves, how would you feel if the CFL didn't come back this year? How would you feel if they had to wait another year? Not to their fault. Like, yes, their business model sucks. Yes, their business model is not ideal for what it should be in the 21st century. In 2021, it should not be this way. Regardless of that, it's not their fault that their business model doesn't work anymore. So you have to ask yourself, does the CFL need to play? Do you care if it does? Meaning, if it doesn't, are you going to be, I'm done type of? There's so many questions to be asked. I think the CFL biggest question mark is going to be players. Players are being told, don't make any changes to your current day-to-day lives. Stay the course. We're still trying to figure out exactly what's happening. Like, once we hear more, we'll let you know. And that's the scary part to me, is you're stringing along fans, you're stringing along business partners, you're stringing along cities, but you're also stringing along your players. And at some point, the players need to know what's going on.
That's probably the most important reason why Randy Ambrosie had to go out this week and do something like this, because you got to reassure those players who their own player association last week said, hey, don't do anything that jeopardizes your employment here, because we're planning on playing. We don't know exactly, but now the commissioner comes out and says here's a date to look forward to, so you could kind of, if you're a player, plan your life now around an August 5th kickoff, I guess. So
not even an August 5th kickoff, and also a December finish. December, yes. For all intents and purposes, people aren't hiring in December. People are trying to save money in December. So if you're dependent on something that goes on after the CFL season, that's a bigger question mark now too, because I didn't know this, that it's played on Thanksgiving Day weekend. That's in October. That gives you 2.5 months to find a job before the end of the year. Great. Now that window is shortened. Do you want to spend Christmas without a job? I don't know. Like, those are things that that are going, that if I was a player, I'd be thinking about.
Yeah, it's important that we have this kind of information from the league. If we're following the CFL as fans, as people covering the XFL and who are just interested, or as more importantly, players in that league, you need to know the plan from the top. And right now, that's the plan from the top. We got that this week. Big news. If you're a CFL fan, if you follow the CFL, if you're an XFL fan, that maybe kind of will interest you, unless you're like me or some other people who really just want to watch the CFL this year, the most anticipated season for me as a CFL fan ever. I know that for sure, because now
me as an XFL fan too.
Yeah. So, but then on the other side of it, we did also get some Randy Ambrosie talking actually about the CFL this week in his update tour, and some of the notes from that are, first off, no, the CFL is not looking for funding from the XFL. They haven't asked for it. They're not probably going to ask for it. It sounds like Randy Ambrosie said, we think there's a Canadian solution to playing this year, basically saying we're going to do this in-house. So there's that, which is something that has come up in just us speculating and discussing everything going on with the discussions and what could potentially be the case when you talk about Redbird Capital, the owners of the XFL, along with The Rock and Danny Garcia, having billions. It's not like the CFL owners have their money too, but maybe someone coming in and helping you out is something you're going to look for if you're a shrewd business person. So we thought of that. That's apparently not the case. So that's one thing that got squashed this week. Bryant, what are you laughing at?
Oh, it's because you're like between the Rock and Danny Garcia and Redbird Capital, there's just billions of dollars in there. And that's like, well, yeah, between me and Gordie Howe, we have the second most games played in NHL history.
You do.
That. So look, the money is there. And I think that's something that I think fans need. And we'll get into that too in our conversation with Dave Naylor, is it's not just an XFL partnership. It's a Redbird Capital partnership, but regardless, the CFL is not, I don't know if they're not interested, but I just don't think they're going to take that aspect or that avenue of, hey, Redbird, can you help us play this?
If that was something like real quick detour down just to look at that road and just be like, what would that look like? Maybe if you did that, that would mean the CFL so desperate and they are beholden now to the owners of the XFL, they virtually have sold themselves to that group, and in a way worse position of power and a negotiation and anything that's going to come up in the future with the talks that they have going on. So with those talks going on, if that funding issue ever was a real thing, like the CFL would be totally damaging their chances at going to the negotiating table and winning whatever they're looking to win in those discussions, whether it be rules related, money related, business, whatever. Like, you could definitely say goodbye to 3 downs if the XFL people are funding 2021, but that's not happening. Randy Ambrosie says that's not something they're considering. But
it's not that it's okay. Change. Look, they're not considering it. Does Redbird Capital now consider it? That's the other question, right? Is like, hey, it's important to us that you play the 2021 season. So let's figure out a way that we can make this work for you, and what's it going to take? That's another aspect that you can look at this. Look, I don't see the CFL making any money this season. Very hard for me now. The question is, how bad are your losses going to be? Ideally, your losses are as small as possible. So I get what they're trying to do, but with the CFL and the XFL's discussions happening now, the CFL is intent on just doing what they're doing. So maybe that has nothing to do with the 2021 season, but I was more interested in the fact that saying, hey, this is just business talks right now. We're in the cover 2, right? The part 2 of the cover 2. Yes.
That's it. You're following the rundown well.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I just all over the place today. I have the Dodgers on. It's just, look, the CFL.
You gotta be kidding me.
I'll go for 3 when it matters. Regardless, I think the CFL and the XFL's discussions being only about business. Do you feel like it's a little deflating for fans? Because look, I get it. It's probably going to happen. The merger is like most likely. That's the highest thing. I want to know what's going to happen to my rules. And for Randy Ambrosie to come out and say, yeah, we're just talking business. We haven't even talked rules. It's like, oh, I want to talk rules. Well, I want the rules.
I'm
a fan. As a fan.
Yeah. Us as like super diehard nerds who are really following this, like every single nook and cranny on this road. Yes, that's like, oh, they're not even talking rules yet. But in the grand scheme of things, that makes total sense. But yeah, Randy Ambrosie this week said, we haven't really discussed rules or anything like that. This has been all business model talk, talking about what we do as a business, what they do, what they're looking to do, what we're looking to do, and basically just kind of like learning about each other, it sounds like. And maybe some of that's a lot official. We'll get into it with Dave Naylor. We did discuss that with him. But yeah, it's been all business, according to Randy Ambrosie, this commissioner of the CFL, not rules during these talks. So yeah, if you've been like following this with us and thinking, oh man, I wonder if they got to the waggle this week in forward motion or whatever, and how many players on the field. Apparently none of that's been discussed.
What is a waggle? I don't know what the waggle is. What is a waggle?
The forward motion. That's the slot.
Oh, is that what that is?
Go forward in the CFL.
They call it the waggle, though? There wasn't a better name for that?
It's a great name. What's wrong with a waggle?
That's like what I would call my like super move when I was playing like checkers. Hey, here comes the waggle, so I could cheat.
Oh, look at Dad. He's about to do his big waggle jump into the pool.
Like my kid, it's my kid wrestling name when I was like wrestling on the bed. Here comes the waggle, the waggler. Sorry.
Well, they are not discussing the waggle. They're discussing
hold on.
Now,
do you believe that?
Yeah.
I don't think I do.
I do, because I don't think they're deep enough into the discussions and even really know what the plan is. Obviously, to talk rules yet. I think they do have to discuss business terms, business opportunities, not even negotiating yet. It sounds like they're just really sizing each other up to me. That's what it means to me. When Randy Ambrosie says, oh, it's been all business, our model, and
none of
the rules. It's sizing up. It's like, look, this is what we got here. This is us. We got a business model that really is odd because, these are our big market teams. They don't make any money, but our small market teams make good money. But our big market teams are owned by a great big sports group.
The Redbird capital of Canada, basically. Yeah.
So look at them. And the XFL's like, we have The Rock. And Danny Garcia. Oh, and like Redbird Capital, Jerry Cardinal own like a handful of the biggest sports entities in the world. So they're sizing each other up. And then also discussing like ideas of just, I think, wide-ranging ideas like we talked about, global expansion, providing football for fans at a time the NFL's not playing, I'm sure, figuring out how it would all go down in terms of, teams being set up in different parts of the world or whatever. So like that stuff that's gets you to go. Once you get that stuff, then you start talking rules. So obviously they're not there yet. That's what it means to me. Disappointing for someone totally following this every step of the way. Yeah, but not unexpected because the CFL's also trying to figure out 2021 at the same time. So they can't be diving. I'm glad for their sake they're not discussing the waggle yet with XFL ownership, because that would put the 2021 season in jeopardy. And that definitely is what has to come first for them.
Well, and I'm telling you, all football fans, not just XFL football fans, especially maybe even the CFL fans with this, is Alan and I specifically, because we've been on this road since day one, the discussion is business, and you'll see that you want to talk about rules. You want to talk about what's going to happen on the kickoffs and on the fields and all that stuff. But when we had conversations with Oliver Luck, with Jeffrey Pollock, with everyone in the league, it was all business for about a year and a half, really. And then we tried to like sneak rules in there, here and there. And it never really came to fruition because it just wasn't on the horizon. Like they never finalized their rules until, the mini camps, probably, I would say.
Yeah.
So it's the last thing that's talked about, because if it doesn't
right before the season was kicked off, they were changing up some stuff in the rule book too. So that stuff comes way late.
Exactly. So I think we want those answers to all those questions about the rule book, to the demographics, to what's going to happen to all the teams. How is this going to be constructed with conferences or leagues or divisions, playoffs, schedule, all this stuff. But really,
Interleague.
They don't even know if they could. I put up a smart season last week and I said 12 games. They have to go in and be like, okay, how much money can we make for 12 games? How much money can we make for 14 games? But we got to do this too. So is 14 really the number? Is it 12? Is playing more makes more sense, or playing less make more sense? Like there's so many things that have to go into this before it can even happen. So we're used to it. XFL fans are used to it. CFL fans, come on and join us. I'm telling you, you're going to enjoy this ride. Once it gets there, and once it starts becoming real, you're going to enjoy this ride. I promise.
Side note, I've been rereading Football for a Buck by our good friend Jeff Pearlman, who was on the show ages ago, and got me thinking about ratios for some reason, because the Canadian ratio. So if the merger does happen, ratio for the region you play in, maybe that is a way that could be fixed, because everyone's worried about the Canadian ratio going away. If you bring in a ratio for wherever that team's located, maybe that is something.
Oh yeah, we lost that because we had to play 15 Canadians and they get to play all Americans. Like that's
all guys from, but they got to play all guys from Chicago.
Their linemen are all from Wisconsin. Ours are from Regina. Like, this isn't going to work.
I don't know about that, but maybe that got me thinking about that. But I'm still in that mode. Of course, we're not going to stop speculating about rules and that stuff. But right now, the leagues are probably just talking numbers, honestly. And that's as much as we get into with it with Dave Naylor. He, of course, gives a little bit more insight on the CFL side of things here, Bryant. But let's set it up now, because we have about I don't know what this will end up being cut down to, maybe like a 35, 40-minute conversation with TSN's CFL insider or football insider, Dave Naylor. And
who's a household name in America now, by the way.
Yes, like absolutely.
Kudos to him. Like he's just chilling. Like he was a Canadian's big, insider guy. Now it's like, hey, I know Dave Naylor.
Of course.
He's more well-known out here.
He's given the scoop on every major moment on this road to the CFL's eventual kickoff which Canadians have waited way too long for. And he's now, of course, following the breadcrumbs on the XFL discussions and being generous enough to let us know his findings right here on this show. So we're going to get into all the latest that he knows and all the latest from Canada and the CFL and their announcements this week. Have some fun speculating as well with a guy who's following it real close. So a real fun conversation here with TSN football insider Dave Naylor on this week's Hot Read.
Welcome back, Dave. How's the move going? I know that was a big thing on your calendar.
Yeah, you guys may have noticed my decor is a little stripped down from the last time I talked to you, where I had lots of cool stuff on the wall and things like that. And I maybe have a bit of an echo in here because half the furniture's out of my office. It's sitting in a pod in my driveway. All my paraphernalia and pennants and stuff that I used to have here is all packed away. So it's we are T-minus 7 days from the move. So yeah, it's going all right. But I yin and yang. One day I think it's going well. The next day I freak out because I think I'm not going to make it in time. So there you are.
Yeah, we gotta pack that room in there. I was super jealous last time we had you on. You had a pretty cool setup there. We got to get that back, Dave.
Got to recreate it in another place in about a week's time. Absolutely.
All right. Yeah. Well, we got some big news this week. That's why we wanted to have you back on the show, because we got an update from the CFL's end, and now as XFL fans, we are obligated to really pay attention, even though some of us already were. But Bryant is now, so we wanted to have you back on because the CFL is aiming now for an August 5th kickoff instead of the planned June kickoff. And I just want to start off saying, is this now where we're at with the CFL and their 2021 season? Are they in a better, a worse, or pretty much the same spot as they were when we last talked to you about a month ago?
Well, I think you could do a glass half empty, glass half full on that one. I mean, the fact that we're going to not play an 18-game season and we're not going to play until at least August, you could say is bad news since the last time we talked and there was still hope of a season. The other side of it would be, at least we know what the plan is. I mean, one of the sort of complaints about this league over the last 14 months has been that whatever's been discussed in scenario A, B, C, or D has been kind of locked away. And there hasn't been a ton of communication to the fans, to the players. And I understand why some of that is. Some of it is when you've got a split room, it's hard to articulate what your league's position is. And in a 9-team league, it's not like you got 30 teams that think this way and you got 2 teams of the other. A lot of splits are 5-4, 6-3, 7-2, and those are tough to come out and say, here's our league's position on this, because you're going to, until you have a consensus. And I think that's one of the things the commissioner was really working very hard at in the last week or so, was trying to find that common ground, that common denominator that everybody can say, yep, we're good with that. I mean, we know there are teams that would play without fans in the stands. We know there aren't 9 of them. So it was like, okay, what do we need to do to be able to play? And it looks like what they came up with is we have to have some degree of fans in the stands. They call it significant. We believe that's about 25% of the stadiums need to be open, 25% of capacity. They've said if they're not all open, they'll adjust. You may have Eastern teams playing home games in the West. And you know what? It's not perfect, guys. Look at college football this year, right? I mean, stuff happens. We all know this would be a one-off. And then the other part of it is I think the strategy on this is sound, right? They're looking at it saying, okay, if we want to start by August, that means we need to know by mid-June what the state of things is. And in our conversations with public health authorities, they tell us that by mid-June, there should be data and vaccine information and other measurements of the state of the virus that should allow us to tell you whether or not we're going to be able to open some of the stands by early August. There's no point trying to do something early if the governments are going to say, well, we don't have enough data, we don't have enough information. The thing that everybody didn't see coming, or I shouldn't say everybody, but I certainly didn't see coming, was the idea that Ontario, Canada's most populous province with home to 1/3 of the CFL franchises, would be in full lockdown until May 21st. I mean, you can't go to the hardware store here. Like it is locked down tight. And the cases, the daily case counts, I mean, we've had our highest since the pandemic began within like the last 10 days. They're down a little bit over this week, but this is, I did not foresee this. If you'd asked me in January and February, where we're going to be in April, I'm like, well, people are vaccinated, people are getting outside, all those kind of things. But they've just started vaccinating people 40 and over in Ontario this week. So we hope that what happens here is similar to what's happened in countries like the UK or Israel or the United States, where it went from a very bad situation to a much more manageable situation once everybody started getting their vaccines. And that's really the projection that the league is making, but they can't really zone in on that projection until they get to mid-June.
Well, right, because I think I read that Ontario wasn't even looking at any type of CFL proposal to get them back in the stadiums. Right?
They got it in their hands, and essentially the government said, "Not no, but not yet." like we got a few things on our plate. We got people in ICUs, we got businesses shut down, we got all kinds of issues, and they just frankly don't have the time or the wherewithal to deal with it right now. And I don't think that's going to be the hurdle here. I think once the case numbers start to go down, I think the return to play protocol, the same people who worked on the National Hockey Leagues are some of those people that worked on the CFLs. They know what government expects. They've got verbal sign off on that protocol from 4 Western provinces. So that's not going to be the issue. The issue is going to be open up the stands. And, the governments here have kind of been focused on numbers of people, not more than even, what the size of the venue is. Like I keep bringing up that last summer, you had bars, restaurants, gyms, strip clubs all open, for months, but there was never a stadium that was open up, even though there were some games that were held in Canada. So I think there may be some lobbying effort on the part of the CFL and other sports leagues to say, hey, if this isn't safe, sure, we understand why you won't be opening up the stands, but is there reason to believe that sitting outdoors in a stadium socially distanced, in 25% capacity of the stadium is more dangerous than a whole lot of other things that the government has already, at least a year ago, approved?
For sure, and I think that's just always the question. I don't know if anyone really knows the answers. We're just all flowing with it right now, and the CFL's in a very interesting predicament because they're dependent on fans in the stands, also playing their normal season. Right, they're not going to the 18 games; they're going to a 14 game schedule. Do you know? Because last we heard the CFL was going to ask players to take a pay cut to try to get the season rolling. Is that still on the table for this 14-game season, or is that not part of the plans anymore?
Well, I think that's going to be at the negotiating table. There's some amendments to the CBA that have to happen. I mean, when you change the schedule from 18 to 14 games, that alone, requires a CBA amendment. So there going to have to be some trading at the table. I think, on the issue of even on pay, right? Is it just prorated, or these guys are going to miss games, so you miss game checks, or is there going to be some other way? Cue me back to what the question you asked was. I just lost my thought there for a moment. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. It was just more about how are the players? Where are the players?
The 20% cut,
because they were asked to take a pay cut.
Right. So that's going to be at the negotiating table. I think the league hopes that provision was for games that were played with no fans in the stands, like basically saying, hey, if we're going to put games on with no gate revenue, we need you to help us. And the players, just on a straight out principle basis, were pretty negative to that. I think the league hopes that they won't have to do that, because if they're not playing games with no fans in the stands, then you don't have to ask for that. Now, the question is, at what point would they say that's enough of the stadium to be open that we don't need a concession from the players? Is it 25%? Is it 50%? I think there are going to be a lot of things at the table that are going to be bargained. My instinct is, and this is just a gut instinct, that I don't see this as the stopper in the deal. Like, I would be surprised if they get the authority to play, if they get the stadiums opened up, if, the players obviously have to agree to a 14-game season, because that's not in the CBA, that the whole idea of them taking cuts with fans in the stands, my instinct tells me I would be surprised if that's the reason the CFL doesn't play this year.
Well, you talk about not playing this year. I think that's still an option out there. I've said on the show a couple times that the CFL is more committed to saying they're committed than actually committed. I think I might take that back, just because they actually came out with a plan. They didn't just say, hey, we'll come back in August and let's see where we are, right? But how great would it be if they had to do the unthinkable and cancel another season?
I'm a bit of a contrarian on this one. I don't believe it's, the end of the world if they don't play this year. And that's not to suggest that I don't think there's an urgency or that it wouldn't be better or those kind of things. I just look at it practically and I say, okay, Like, I remember when the National Hockey League disappeared for a year, right? And I was probably one of those people who said, there's no way you can take your league completely out of the news cycle for an entire year, in 30 markets and then just come back. Well, they did. And you know what? People flocked, at least in this country, they flocked to the arenas. I mean, you couldn't keep people out, right? All of that anger, that wasn't because of a pandemic. People were mad. They were mad at the owners. They were mad at the players. They're mad at everybody. Sorry, game on. Boom, we're back, right? And look, I know the loyalty point in this country for hockey is different than football. But, I mean, let's use Ottawa, for example. The team folded there in the spring of 2006. I was living there then, okay? For the next few years, nobody talked about CFL football. And if you did have a conversation about CFL football, people's eyeballs hit the ceiling before you finished your first sentence because we were just fed up with it. Team had folded, gone, whatever. They came back in 2014. Every game sold out. They were gone for 8 years. 8 years of no CFL football in Ottawa. Nobody watching it. And when it came back, boom, right? So you get into these debates. What's more likely, out of sight, out of mind, or absence makes the heart grow faster? I think actual evidence tells us that absence makes the heart grow faster is a more likely scenario than, I completely forgot about the Canadian Football League during that 2 years they didn't play. Well, no, I understand why people argue it, and I'm not arguing to not play. I'm just saying that empirically, when I look at the things that in the sports world that try to relate to a situation like this, it doesn't make sense to me that if for some reason, if there's a new variant that rips through this country and the vaccines can't block it and all kinds of, and we don't play this year, I don't necessarily believe that. And the other thing is, it's not necessarily like the teams are going to have some great economic windfall if they play this year versus if they don't play this year. They're going to be in tough economic situation in either scenario. So it's not like if they don't, there's a great financial difference. And I just don't think fans forget that quickly. So I understand the urgency, and I think there are owners that absolutely believe they do need to play. But when I see these comments from somebody saying, if they don't play this year, that's it for the CFL, that just doesn't pass my logic test.
So then this week, going off that, Randy Ambrosie said when faced with the question, asking the XFL for funding for this season, said that they think they could find a strictly Canadian solution, meaning not thinking about that. So you're saying, at least you're a contrarian here. You said yourself, do you think the CFL would even put that on the table if it comes down to that, resorting to Redbird capital funding to get the 2021 season off the ground? Do you think people in the building at CFL headquarters are thinking it's that dire to get the season played this year?
I had asked that question some people at senior positions in the league before Randy made those comments yesterday, and I had been told that was not on the table, that was not an option, that in terms of the discussions with Redbird and Danny Garcia and Dwayne Johnson, that there was never an idea that they would finance this season. I mean, you could see how that might be thrown into some business arrangement, that if you were going to do this and they were going to do this and you're going to do this and they'll provide you with an injection of capital to get you through this season. I guess you can see how that would come about. But from what I understand, that is not part. I really do think these two things are running on parallel tracks. Like, one is about the next few months and one is about the next few years. And I haven't found a point where they intersect, where if this happens, then that has this effect on that. So no, I don't think that is where the league is prepared to go. And although I could see where it might have made some sense, and I wondered about it myself, to my understanding and knowledge, there is no point where between now and August 5th, they're going to turn to Redbird and say, hey, can you help us finance this season? I mean, and we should be clear to some degree, the CFL is not a rich league, and the economy of scale comparison to the NFL is, single digit percentage points right now as the NFL's economy keeps growing. But the owners in this league, are not marginally wealthy. They're very, very wealthy. Now, I have a problem sometimes when people say, well, they're wealthy, therefore they should just, write blank checks forever and pay without plan. Well, part of the reason wealthy people are wealthy is because they make good business decisions to get here, right? I really resent almost that view of like, well, they can afford it. Well, yeah, but it's got to make business sense. But that said, it's not like they would be collectively desperate for, if they needed to spend capital, that they would need to borrow it from Redbird or necessarily have it as part of an arrangement, because they do individually. I mean, there are 3 of the teams that are publicly owned. That's a bit of a different category. But you look at the 6 private owners collectively, there's plenty of wealth there if they want to, use that to finance this season. And I think every one of them knows that to play this year, to some degree, it's going to mean reaching into their pockets.
Well, I think it also could be that what if Redbird feels it's important for the CFL to play this season? Then maybe they interject, right? You're saying parallel tracks. Maybe at some point they intersect and Redbird says, hey, we want you to play. It'll help us in the future. I can see maybe something like that happening perhaps too.
Yeah, and I don't know. There's so many parts of this story that are so speculative. Like, I don't know how much it would matter to the XFL partners if the CFL plays this year, like whether that makes a difference to them or not. I haven't been told either way, that it does or it doesn't. It was interesting, Randy Ambrosie's comments about kind of characterizing the conversation with the XFL that, and it makes sense. What he said is that, they're exploring, what the business collaboration would bring, the due diligence on that. And it does make sense that you would have to make sure that this is actually an arrangement that is going to benefit you sufficiently before you sit down and say, okay, now what are we going to do about 3 downs versus 4, right? Like, there's no point having that conversation if it doesn't make business sense for your league to get involved in this. So, if that is still the stage they're at, exploring what the collaboration would look like, what the revenue streams would look like, how they'd be shared, how they'd be divided, how you're going to build your business. Those are probably the things that you need to knock off before you get to, so how wide's the field going to be?
Yeah, that's going right to my next question, Dave. Hopping from the track that we were on, the CFL 2021 season, over to XFL CFL discussions. Randy Ambrosie said we're not talking about rules this week with the XFL, and like you said, that does make sense. So, what do you think it means when he says it's been all about business? Are they taking a look at both entities' financials? Do you think this is like a formal situation where they're putting books down and really comparing and figuring all that stuff out? Do you think, because they're saying it's getting serious, and now they're saying he said there's a sense of urgency. What do you think that actually means?
Well, and look, I think they've probably talked about the rules thing. I don't know if they've negotiated off the rule things. I mean, look, as I said, right away, there's 3 questions that come to mind on this one that are impossible to ignore, right? When are you playing? What are the rules? And this one's a bit sentimental for Canadians, but what trophy are you playing for? Okay, those are the 3 that just come up automatically. So I think there's got to be some acknowledgement that they're going to have to get there, even if they're not sitting down and negotiating over those points. But I guess the question is sort of looking at what would a CFL look like if you're playing from April to September? What are the revenue streams that are coming in to play with the XFL? What's the split of those revenue streams going to be? What's the budget of your team going to be? What are the costs you're incurred if you're flying to Houston and Washington and Tampa Bay? I mean, you really have to project all of those things to see what does the business of a new league, a collaborative league, look like? And if you get that far and you say, we think this is sustainable and this works, then you've got an opportunity, to sort of get to the next level. But it sounds like that's what they're doing. And basically, I was told this is due diligence stage, right? And if anybody comes with you for a business proposal, somebody wants to buy your show and put it on a different platform, the first thing you guys would do is do your due diligence, right? On who these people are that want to buy it and where they want to take it and what you're going to get from it. That I think is essentially, what is, from what I can understand, is what is happening right now. And I think if the business projections are positive and the league, especially through this next few years, can see a way through it, then you're going to probably move to the next stage.
Well, I mean, I think on the XFL side, we've been so intrigued and want something to kind of come from all this, but the more you look at it, the more you read, it just doesn't seem clear. At least it just seems like we're kind of where we are. Is there a clear picture now of what this partnership may look like in the next few years on your side, or is it just the kind of where we were a month ago? I
think we are. It's funny. I do a lot of radio interviews in this country, and I always get asked, "What's the latest on the XFL Cfl negotiations?" And the answer I've been giving lately is I don't know. And I think there's a reason for that. This thing is locked down with non-disclosure agreements. I'm quite certain. So the most that I've been able to even, get a sense of, I honestly have to come up with ideas on myself, and then maybe run them by people and say, does this make sense? And people will kind of wink at you and you go, yeah, that could, yeah, or no, I don't think that's going to happen. Like, there's not a lot of leaks of information happening here. You kind of get a nod or a wink if you kind of bring up an idea. And I'll bring up an example. I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago about the shared international vision of the XFL and the CFL. And it's funny, the way I came up with the idea for that column was I was sitting there one night and I was about to tweet out, hey, I think one of the elements, this whole XFL CFL thing that has been, not explored as fully as it should, is the idea that they have a shared vision to go international. And I'll be surprised if at some point this league doesn't involve designs for teams in Mexico or Europe. And I was about to hit tweet and I thought, you know what? I should write that.
Careful.
So I went down. I actually went down right at that moment, sat at my computer, and an hour and a half later, I had a column. A lot of times when I write columns, the thinking happens as I'm writing, right? And I started thinking about when I spoke to Dani Garcia on March 10th. She said one of the things that brought brought them to the table was the international relationships that Randy Ambrosie had developed and the idea of global players and expanding the game globally. Somebody pointed out to me that the tweet she made that morning had 3 emojis: the Canadian flag, the US flag, and the globe, right? And then I talked to some people and again, ran these ideas by some people, and people were like, yeah, you're not wrong. Like that's part of where these two sides sort of have a shared vision. And I think the possibility of teams in Mexico first and eventually Europe is real. I think that's part of the potential vision of this, is these two sides get together. And then if you're Canadian, you look at it and say, well, maybe we're not being swallowed up in, another failed attempt at U.S. alternative football. We're going to be part of what's going to be more of a global league. And Randy Ambrosie has had this idea since the start, right? It's been like, we're going to create interest in the CFL in other countries. We're going to reach out and make partnerships. We're going to become, and he even said to me one time, get used to this phrase, the largest global football league in the world. Okay. He said that to me, all those things. So again, these are things that the ideas went off in my head. Started thinking about that. And the question has always been, how do you monetize that? How do you make that work with 9 teams within Canada? But if all of a sudden you're North American and then you're going to go from there to Mexico, from Canada, US to Mexico, and now you're going to have global players in your league, and you can start to create, you're going to put teams in Europe or television rights in Mexico. All of a sudden, that seems like, look, it's still like blueprint stuff, but that seems more plausible to me than just saying, well, we're going to have some German offensive linemen and some Finnish safeties, and we're going to sell television rights in Germany and Finland based on that, which is essentially what the business model was before you got there, right? Like, if you got a starting quarterback from Germany in your league, maybe, but people aren't going to pay in Germany to watch the right guard because he's from Hamburg, right? It's just not going to work that way. So there's an example of an idea that I just kind of got, put it all together one night, ran down, wrote a column on it, ran it by a few people in the league. And, like I said, I hadn't recognized the emoji that Dani Garcia put out that day with the globe, but I don't want to read too much into it. But when you combine it with what else she told me that day when I did have a chance to talk to her, and sometimes, like, it's funny because Randy Ambrosie talked a couple days later about a global vision. And I'm sure people think that, like, he texted me and say, hey, write about the global vision or something. Like, I hadn't talked to Randy till yesterday, since March the 10th, so it's not like him and I are tight and he's providing me updates or things like that. But that's kind of how some of the reporting on this has to be done. You got to kind of read the clues a little bit, come up with your sort of theory, and then run it by some people and see if you can get something that way. I mean, that was same thing with some of the stuff I wrote about the Argonauts. Like, I started hearing that Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment was as bullish or more bullish than any team in the league about pursuing the XFL thing. And I asked myself, well, why would that be? Let me think. Okay, they've been owners of the Argonauts for 4 years, either fully as MLSE or with 2/3 of the partners there. They made a bet that going to BMO Field would be, a game changer for the Argonauts, going to a small outdoor stadium on the shores of Lake Ontario. It hasn't been. It hasn't worked. And MLSE is a company that basically their two objectives are to drive revenue and to drive value, whether it's real estate, sports, whatever. They haven't been able to do that with the Toronto Argonauts. So, if I was MLSE and I was looking at my Toronto Argonaut franchise in the CFL and saying, what are we going to do? And somebody suggested an opportunity to, make a bigger league, get involved with U.S. markets, U.S. television, all those. It's no mystery to me why MLSE looks at that and says, we want to explore that because, frankly, the property we have right now under the business model that we're operating on, which is basically no shared revenue in this league or like a very small percentage of shared revenue in this league, isn't really working for us. Now, nobody at MLSE told me that, right? But I just kind of figured that out, right? That's when you start hearing something and then you put it to something else, you can kind of come up with your, I don't want to say theory, but your idea about why something you're hearing might be true. And that's kind of how a lot of the reporting on this story is happening.
And you look at the landscape of the sports business world, elsewhere, you see Redbird Capital getting in with a group like Fenway Sports Group. MLSE sees what they're doing and the value of all their properties. Want to be like them, want to make money like them. That just makes sense.
Well, it does, right? And this is one of the challenges in the league, right? Is you've got owners with very, very different incentives. The community-owned team in Winnipeg or Saskatchewan does not have the same goals as Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And that's always been one of the challenges, right? To getting this league to kind of come together. But you're right. I mean, and I've spent a little bit of time learning more about Redbird and about Jerry Cardinale and about Alex Shiner, who's his top sports guy. And they don't have a lot of failures on their resumes. I gotta say, there's a lot of success there, and you can certainly argue whether that's applicable to this situation. But if you were MLSE or another team that was concerned about the state of the CFL's business model, and you looked at their history of success, I think that would certainly attract you to at least want to have the conversation. And I think that's significant when you look at that same thing goes for Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia. Not a lot of failures on their resumes, in the sport entertainment field, and I'm sure that's part of what has brought these sides together. And you could certainly understand why they would look at that and say, we have this asset called the Toronto Argonauts. It's in the CFL under this traditional business model. They are one of the teams that wants to explore this. And the only thing I would say is that they may have been, more bullish, but any characterization that this is MLSE like leading the league over Niagara Falls, and the other owners are going kicking and screaming, that is not, from what I can tell, the case at all. I mean, there is pretty strong backing for exploring this idea and seeing where it goes across the league. So MLSE may have been a bit of a catalyst on this one, but I don't think they're dragging everybody in a direction against their will.
Well, the noise on social media is CFL XFL, but in reality, it's CFL Redbird, CFL The Rock, it's CFL Danny Garcia. That's kind of the noise of where it should be.
Well, and people say, well, what is the XFL, right? It's failed franchises. It's a bunch of equipment sitting in a locker somewhere. No, let's be honest. The XFL is Danny Garcia, Dwayne Johnson, and Redbird Capital. That's the value that you're negotiating with. If whatever their assets are worth nothing, right? It's the relationships and the expertise that you're trying to tap into. And, that's, it's interesting because I've read some of the comments from Alex Shiner and Jerry Cardinale and learned a little bit more about how they see sports and see value in sports and things like that. And it was funny because I think Alex Shiner did a podcast about 3 weeks before the announcement of the CFL XFL formal talks. And one of the things he talked about was that the thing that hadn't been proven in spring football was there a market? Were people interested? And that at least through the 5 weeks of XFL ratings, when you compare them to other major sports properties, there seemed to be. Now, is that going to be sustainable? And I remember myself saying at some point, your league can't just go down every week in ratings, right? Like at some point, you got to get a point where you're building up and you see that as the season goes on, your ratings were bigger than the week before. And I think in the XFL, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, every week they were smaller than the week before. And that's not a good trend. But at least in terms of the numbers, just in an absolute sense, they were decent.
So the one thing it's hard because we all want to know when. We want to know when is this going to happen? When are we going to know something? The CFL season is now scheduled to finish somewhere at the beginning of December. Are the CFL and the XFL going to wait until then? It seems like a long time to wait until if you want a 2022 season, that seems like a long time to wait to announce anything. What's your gut feeling? I know there's probably not a lot out there on when this will happen, but for a 2022 season to happen, December's a long time away, and not a long time for you to actually.
Well, December's a long time away, and if the CFL season ends in mid-December, does anybody really think they're going to be kicking off by April the next year? Like that. Look, again, this is me reading the tea leaves. I feel like this is going to be more likely a 2023 than a 2022. And here's the reasons why. One is by 2023, hopefully most of this virus stuff is behind us, right? I don't know if you want to invest on a new league and launch it and find out that next March there's still this stuff to deal with, right? So it would put you a year beyond, hopefully, that stuff. Two, if you look at the last XFL, and you guys would know this, the last XFL coach was hired 10 months before kickoff. Like we're probably already there, right? Or we're about there. We're going to get there pretty soon. If kickoff is March, and there hasn't been a single coach hired. We don't even know where the cities are. So that doesn't line up with the timelines of last time. And now that you see that the CFL is going to play till mid-December, that takes an already short off season and shortens it even more. So my instinct tells me 2023. I guess that makes it more reasonable that we might have to wait until next offseason. The question would be, if it is going to be a 2023 play, what's the CFL doing in 2022? Are they playing? Are they not playing? Are they playing with new rules? That to me is almost as intriguing a question as when the XFL CFL collaboration might start. Would be if this is going to happen, but it's not going to happen in 2023. How do we get through 2022? Because you can certainly see that while you want to keep the momentum going, you want them playing, but if it's going to mean another year of losses for the CFL owners for a league that's not going to exist anymore, and I know it sounds very strange to say that, kind of surreal, do they just go straight forward, fast forward, and say at the end of this season, see everybody in 16 months? I don't know.
Yeah, we got into a little bit of that last time, but I don't even want to speculate on that stuff right now, Dave. I just think I need right now, after all this talk and the speculation that's gone for now over a month, a distraction. So I just want the CFL to kick off and we could just focus on the game, and the speculation will, I think, go to the background a little bit, at least amongst fans who are getting kind of heated right now on social media with all the XFL talk.
Well, it is. And I think that's where people's primary focus still is. I mean, the avid fans, I think it is about, when are we going to play? Because it's been so long, and there've been retirements, and people feel they just missed the game, right? They just missed the game. But it is going to be a bit surreal to have this other story kind of lurking in the background, right? And as you know, there's no shortage of people associated with the Canadian Football League, and some of them are my colleagues, who are not big fans of this idea, right? And so, we've seen. Yeah. So that's the other part that's going to be kind of surreal. That as we have to kind of follow the news of this, there are people and look, I understand this. Like, I understand the opinion of people that just say this sounds like writing the CFL's death certificate. And there are other people that think that ignoring this opportunity sounds like signing the CFL's death certificate. And that's where you get the passion, because both sides kind of believe that the other side is leading the league, over the cliff. And I've tried to play the middle ground here, right? My opinion, which has been, I think, mischaracterized by people on Twitter because of some of the snippets of things I say that get lifted out on Twitter and stuff like this. But my opinion is, I think the status quo is an unsure road for the Canadian Football League. Like, I don't know whether it's business. Pre-pandemic, the business model did not work in Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver. So now you're going to go into a worse kind of live event economy. Do you have owners in those cities willing to sustain? Basically, the business model for Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver for the last 20 years has been philanthropy, right? That's been the business model, okay? That's why the Toronto Argonauts have had 7 owners since 1990. And every time the team sold, it sold for little or no value. That's why Bob Wettenall in Montreal went running off into the night after the 2018 season. He'd owned the team for 21 years, but in the end, he just threw the keys on the table and took off, right? That's a history of what's happened in this league. Now you've got Vancouver, where you've got a team owned by an estate. Given the state of the CFL right now, show me the person who's going to step up there and say, I'm going to invest in that team and sustain losses for the next few years because I believe in this. Okay. that's really what I come back to is say, does this league have a sustainable plan for those three markets? And if they don't, then you can't ignore the XFL option because you can't run a 6-team league. I'm concerned that the CFL may be running out of people that want to continue to finance those teams in those three markets. And it's so weird because the CFL, for all its quirks and things, one of the really weird quirks is that it's an upside down league, right? Like if we talk about any other major league sport, we're going to talk about the big markets are New York and LA and Chicago and Houston. Mm-hmm. In this league, the big revenue markets are Regina, 225,000 people in Regina, biggest revenue in the league. Okay. Winnipeg, again, not a city of 1 million people, about 750,000, biggest revenue in the league. Edmonton, a little bigger, but the cities that suffer revenue wise are Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And which is why when you get into a conversation about revenue sharing, it gets very prickly, right? Because you can say in other leagues, it's like, well, of course the Yankees are going to share with, the Minnesota Twins, or of course, the Chicago Blackhawks are going to share with Nashville. That's the way sports is. The big markets share with the smaller markets to make it work. But in this league, you'd have to convince the community-owned team in Saskatchewan that their hard-earned dollars, for that team that is owned by the public, should be shared with the wealthiest sport and entertainment company in the country, which is Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, that pays some NBA players $500,000 a night for one guy. So, again, different ownership, but it's among the many quirks of the CFL. That's almost one of the weirdest because it doesn't. I don't know another sports league that has that dynamic in place. Where I live, like the GTA is like 5-6 million people, right? You can draw an hour circumference from downtown Toronto and get about 9 million people. But 1 in 4 Canadians lives like within an hour and a half of where the Argonauts play. Okay. And they average 14,000 a game, right? And I don't know what their revenue stream was, but it wasn't very good. And literally in Regina, you've got a province of 1 million people, a city of 225,000, and they had $43 million in revenue or something last year. Like it's an upside down league economically. That's one of the things that makes it tricky to figure out.
Yeah. I don't know if the NFL would survive if they had 32 Green Bays in that league, right? You still need the big money markets, and you would hope people like in Toronto would just get lost into the stadium at some point during the season to make some money.
Well, and like I'm 53, so I'm old enough to remember when this wasn't the case, right? Like in the late 1970s, in the early 1980s, the Argonauts, even though they were terrible, would draw 50,000 a game. I mean, they were a big deal in this city. I mean, when Anthony Davis came out of USC in 1976 and came to the Toronto Argonauts instead of the NFL, like a CFL rookie had his own radio show in this city, like the Anthony Davis Show that was before sports radio. I mean, that was like on a mainstream #1 station in the city, the Anthony Davis Show. Like that's how big a deal the Argonauts were. So I don't feel like the old guy when I talk about this stuff now, but it it hasn't always been this way, but it's been this way for a while.
It's a good idea to give a player a radio show to lure him to your city or to your league. That might be something the XFL CFL collab should think about in the future. Podcasts, maybe partnering them up with us.
Well, exactly. It's funny. You guys remember? You guys are too young to remember Anthony Davis, right?
Oh yeah, that's probably right before our time. I've never heard that. That's amazing.
One of my earliest memories, if I share a little story here with you, if I could. One of my earliest memories in life, like I'm 5 years old, 6 years old, is Anthony Davis scoring 6 touchdowns for USC in a game against Notre Dame, right? And I can literally remember my dad saying to me, watch this guy. He's already got 4 touchdowns. And like they kicked it off and he ran one back for a 5th or whatever. And to this day, like, earliest memories in life, Anthony Davis, 5 touchdowns against Notre Dame. So fast forward many decades, and I wrote a story about CFL players in the U.S. that had pension money that they never collected, and that the Players Association was trying to find these guys to say, hey, you played 2 or 3 years in the CFL, you got some pension money that's matured for 30 years. So I wrote this story. And I'm driving, actually, it was to a Montreal Expos game. It tells you how long ago it was. And to cover that, and my phone went off, and I answered it, and it was Anthony Davis. And he asked me, is Dave Naylor there speaking? Dave, this is Anthony Davis. I said, Anthony Davis. Oh my God. I said, you're my earliest memory in life. I remember like in 1974 when you scored 5 touchdowns for USC against Notre Dame. My dad took me and said, watch this guy. He's already got 4 touchdowns. See, watch him get 5. And he said to me, well, that's great, but you tell your dad it was 6. And apparently it was. Anyway, little fun story on CFL lore. The kind of players who used to come to this league.
Well, we'll be seeing some great players in the league pretty soon, I think, because I have a feeling we're going to be seeing this collab oration come together with some talented football players that aren't getting a shot. Who knows how big it could get global, Dave, but we're just going to have to keep speculating. We appreciate you for coming on to the show the last 2 months now and really opening our eyes up to what's going on with the CFL, the XFL's potential partner. We feel like we're ahead of this now. I mean, I feel like I know everything that's vital in terms of what's going on with the CFL. We know the status quo of the XFL. That's not sustainable because they don't exist right now, really. So knowing what's going on with the CFL, it's really appreciate you taking the time and telling us all about it, giving us your insight. And now we could have fun speculating, but even more fun, hopefully, watching CFL football in August.
Well, I can imagine you guys, like, when the CFL kicks off, and I'm going to go with when, because I do believe that. I honestly do. And it's funny, the last little while, I've had players DMing me, asking me, honestly, what do you think is going to happen? And I've said to them the same thing I've said on air. Nothing I see tells me the league is preparing not to play. And there are people who I think are credible in this league who have come out publicly and said, we're going to play. And I don't think, some of these people I have a history with, I don't think they would be saying that if they didn't believe it. So, you guys must be just like frothing to actually see the CFL and watch it from a different perspective, right?
It's the most anticipated CFL season in XFL history, Dave.
That's a beautiful way of putting it. All right.
Thanks to TSN's football insider, Dave Naylor, for joining us here. And this is the XFL show. Bryant learned about for Randy Ambrosie and his relationship, a legend named Anthony Davis that I never knew of.
Lakers?
Chose that. No, USC.
Oh, okay.
The first famous Anthony Davis in LA. And, of course, Dave Naylor getting into everything that he thinks could happen with the CFL and the XFL. Thing I took away most, though, the CFL not necessarily needing to play in 2021. I was very minimally shocked that he actually said that it wouldn't be the end of the world. Although to a lot of people, I think it would, but maybe in the grand scheme of things, in reality, it wouldn't be the worst thing. But then you also factor in, with the XFL ownership like that, I don't know.
They are, I think, so you go back to they are committed to saying they are committed to playing in 2021. How important is it to them? I mean, you tell me, fans, how important would it be for you to lose money? How important do you want to go out there and lose money? I guess I don't know. Either way, it was great to hear from our friend. We'll probably get him on next time we hear some big news for sure. He's always a fun guy to talk to.
Yeah,
we've almost become best friends. I'm finally happy that I am no longer the most important person in Canada on this show.
That I'm happy about that too.
It was going to my head a little bit.
Yeah, that was going to your head, getting you too cocky, but also, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, nobody knows what's going on unless you're in the room more than Dave Naylor. He's following it every single day. So, like he said, also another big thing to take away, the NDAs that are probably floating around all over this thing, the negotiations, we're not going to hear diddly unless it's mandated and planned. So with Dave Naylor, guys like him following the trail and giving us this insight, it's super important for all of us trying to follow along and enjoy this ride with alignment between the XFL and CFL.
Yeah, there's just so much there, and I feel like he's involved as much as possible, but at the same time, NDAs, I know all about them. I've signed them in the past. It's like you get excited to tell people, but you really can't. You just gotta wait and see. And so hopefully at some point we'll actually hear everything that everybody has NDA'd, I guess. Can you NDA?
Yes.
NDA'd? I guess that works. But either way.
That is a verb. I like also that he pointed out, like, anything he brings up could maybe get like a wink and oh yeah, maybe, sure.
Nope.
If someone
Yes,
that means that anything someone's like maybe gives you a maybe to, it's still an I don't know. So
it's like, what is it? Is it if you're watching me on YouTube, is it like no, yes.
Yeah, nodding when you're saying no when you're saying yes. This just essentially means no one's saying jack squat, and if they say otherwise, it's pretty much pure speculation unless it comes as reported news from a credible source like Dave Naylor or someone else, or maybe Bryant's favorite Mike Florio. I don't know. That would be devastating to him though.
If he became the insider.
Or right here on this show. Who knows? Maybe Randy Ambrosie calls me up one day and says, hey, I love how much I love Mortal Kombat. You love Mortal Kombat. Want to know the scoop? We're kicking off in 2023. Tell everybody.
Why did we should have done this the entire episode, Alan? Just kind of like a little body shifts the entire, like they do in Mortal Kombat before they fight. Anyway, either way, this week you got to hear Canadian great Dave Naylor, so I'm happy for that. But if you want to tune in every single week to another Canadian great, me, Bryant, then catch us here every single Friday right here on your favorite podcast app. That's Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure you give us that 5-star review. Alan, I was in Vancouver, very big in Vancouver. If you got a question, comment, or topic you want us to cover, well, then text or call the XFL Fan Line 724-5654-XFL. Standard text messaging and international rates do apply. Also, follow us on all social media platforms at XFL Show. Twitter is probably the most active, but like I said last week, Alan loves the Facebook. Or if you want to say hi to us, hello. Subscribe and watch us on YouTube at youtube.com/This Is the XFL Show, the official YouTube page of This Is the XFL Show. And don't forget to check out our sponsors, Pretty Easy Podcasts. Go to prettyeasypodcasts.com and get started today because they make podcasting pretty easy.
Yes, they sure do. Bryant, you killed it there. And you know what? Everybody who watched or listened this week, let us know what you think about the CFL not playing the Grey Cup on Thanksgiving. I want to know just how devastating that really is.
Yeah, it seemed like it's a point of conflict of maybe this is the hill we will die on, is we will not play the Grey Cup on not Thanksgiving weekend. Whoops.
Yikes. Well, I think Brian also will probably put some other
last 2
good
years. Whoops.
Questions at XFL Show for you to answer, and we'll interact with you there. We appreciate you so much. And I call that XFL Fan Line, like you said, though. Really want to get some voicemails to play on the show, which we haven't done in a while. We've gotten calls and texts to it, which we appreciate. 724-5654-XFL. Call that number, leave a voicemail. We will play your damn voice right on the air. But remember, if you call the XFL Fan Line and we capture your voice, your soul is mine. Sorry.
Wow.
Almost Mortal Kombat time.
Almost Mortal Kombat time. Wow. Who's your character? Mine was Raiden. I was always
Scorpion.
a Raiden guy.
Back A, cheating all day. Get over here, uppercut all day. I no shame.
No up,
shame
down, down
whatsoever.
Transport
Or
to the other side.
That's
Or
cheating as
front,
well.
front, back. I think it was like the flying dive.
There's so many combinations you got to remember, and if you sit down with the book or now your phone with the moves, that's weak. But I understand if you have to do it. It's Mortal Kombat. You have to do whatever you can to win, because if you don't, you're done. All right, enjoy Mortal Kombat, everybody. And thank you for enjoying this episode, and enjoy next week's episode, because we'll have one, as we always do. We'll be back every single week, baby, right here on the YouTube channel and on your favorite podcast app. Thanks to Dave Naylor from TSN once again. Thanks to Bryant for doing this show during a Dodger game and spending time here, even though he could just be reveling in his fame in Vancouver. And thanks to me for being here and sitting here in this chair and discussing leagues that don't actually play football right now. We've still been doing it, but they're gonna in August. Maybe. I hope. Actually, I'm going to go say some kind words to the universe, and hopefully it does happen. Until then, for Bryant, I'm Alan. This is the XFL Show. Remember, they're listening.